And the wording part is really interesting because I think people, when they learn about metaphysics and manifestation and things like that, we learn early on that the universe doesn't really recognize negatives, right? So if you say, I don't want to do a specific thing, then the universe is going to give you more opportunities to not want that specific thing, right? It's like you have to speak to the universe in positive. So it is very, very, very important the way that you word things.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to the show. I'm Lisa Wetzel, and I channel information from the Akashic Records. And I'm so excited to have Arthur Graye as my guest today. He has a world of gifts and different things that he does. And the main thing that I wanted to discuss with Arthur is more about a little bit about gods and goddesses, angels, energy, and other things that involve all of that. And more than anything else, we want to wrap the show up by discussing community and how important it is to have a support system and a support team around you. So, Arthur, you have so many gifts and you do so many different things. And I want to talk a little bit. First of all, I want you to explain a little bit about the spiritual counseling that you do. So can you tell everybody a little bit about how you got started in this journey of spirituality and your journey about getting into this and sharing your gifts?
Sure. So it's good to be here, Lisa. Thank you for having me. First off, it's really kind of a lifelong thing for me doing all of this. I was about 6 years old when I first had my first little dream, like psychic premonition. And after that, it was really just about devouring all the information that I possibly could. I was raised in a severely, like almost fanatical Nazarene household. So all of this stuff was really, really, really off limits. So I was literally like reading books from the library in my closet and under my bed when I was a kid. Um, Over the years, as I grew up, the voices and everything just kind of got stronger, and the visions kept happening more often, and I just kind of embraced it until college, and then I just wanted it to stop. So I developed some bad habits during art school, trying to be normal, whatever that is, right? And then after art school, I found the tarot cards, and the tarot cards actually snapped everything into focus for me. All the voices in my head, all the visions that I was having, everything that I thought was like kind of making, like I thought I was kind of going crazy, right? Because you hear voices in your head sometimes and you don't know what that is, then you're like, oh, well, that's not supposed to happen. But the tarot cards actually allowed me to categorize all the things that were happening in my head. And so one thing led to another. And um, we started with divination and tarot, and then we moved into Reiki and all kinds of other energy healing and everything. And then in 2009, I started the Green Man Studios, the business, and I started doing all of this professionally because I just felt like I had things to say. I've always had things to say. And I felt like I could help people on their spiritual path, whether that's through meditation or energy work or, divination. I kind of have my hands in everything. I say we because I refer to me and my husband because he helps me with a lot of it. But the company and everything's just is mine, and I think it's very important just to share your experience because you never know who else is going through the same thing, and you might be able to touch them and help them in some way, maybe without even knowing it. So,
Yeah. So thank you for explaining that. So, Arthur, with all of your experiences and everything that you have done, and you have become so proficient in all of the different expertises, the tarot and the different things that you do. Let's talk a little bit about gods and goddesses, because this also falls under your spectrum of understanding. And what my question is, there's gods and goddesses are are different. They kind of fall under different categories depending on the culture or the mystical traditions or the religious traditions. So, can you kind of explain a little bit about what is your definition of what God and goddesses are and how they may differ from the religious aspects or the cultural aspects?
So, cultural as the cultural aspects and religious aspects of gods and goddesses, like I feel like they actually see them as entities, like people that are like sitting in a different realm or in the clouds or whatever like that. And that's interesting to me. I've always found it fascinating. Like I said, I was raised Christian, really, really, really strict Christian. Like we're talking like my great grandparents didn't believe in TV or radio. My grandma never cut her hair. She never wore pants, things like that. So very, very intense, shall we say. So definitely in the way that we were raised, like God was a person, like sitting on a throne in heaven, right? And that never really felt right to me. So as I kind of went through all of these different aspects, different traditions, I voraciously read everything I can on folklore and mythology. And a lot of like my personal belief now is that all the gods and goddesses are basically energies instead of, I mean, you can describe energies as being entities, but if you look at it, like all the different cultures in the world have a goddess of war or wisdom. Like in Greek, it's Athena. In the Hindu, we have Kali, the destroyer. And it's all the same energies. And so my idea, my thinking on it is that the gods and goddesses are all different aspects of the human experience. And whenever we need to call on love, say per se, then we can get that goddess to come and help us. And you can look at it as being a goddess, or you can look at it as being an energy. But to me, it does the same thing. To me, I think it's a little fun to actually name the energies and stuff. I'm a real big fan of like the Greek pantheon. So like Athena, Zeus, things like that. I also follow a lot of the African traditions. So like the Orishas, they're really interesting to me. But I feel like you can look at it one of two ways, and I don't think either one is wrong. I just feel like you can look at it from a more religious aspect where they are actual like people sitting in front of you, or you can look at it from a more metaphysical aspect where the energies are just something that you can call in and have surround you. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. It makes sense to me. So how can we use these energies, these god and goddess energies to benefit ourselves and our lives and choices and decisions that may occur?
Yeah. So it really just depends on what you practice. If you don't really have a practice, then you can call on the energy and just have them be with you. Like you can like call on Archangel Michael, for instance, for protection while you're driving. It's easy as that. Just say, Archangel Michael, please protect me while I'm driving. Right. So I think that there is a level of reverence that you should treat these entities or aspects with, but also like not so much so that you're separated from them. Does that make sense? I
Mhm.
feel like it's more effective if you treat it like a personal interaction, like a relationship between the two of you, right? So I can just ask Archangel Michael to protect me while I'm driving, but then I can also, when I'm actually doing a ritual with candles and incense and crystals and actual ceremony, I can call in Archangel Michael to ask him to maybe protect my loved ones or something like that. So you can do it ritualistically and ceremonially as much as you want, but you can also keep it casual and easy.
Mhm.
And most of the people that I know in my life keep it casual and easy.
Mhm. So, is there a relationship that you have to develop, or is it required to develop a certain relationship with whichever god you're using or goddess?
So different traditions have different rules. I know that a lot of the African diaspora, they do require someone to dedicate themselves to a specific deity. Personally, I'm never going to do that because I like to pick and choose what I want. You know what I mean? But a lot of cultures do require like a dedication ceremony. Even some Wicca, like some witchcraft, is like a year and a day where you have to like dedicate yourself to a specific aspect. Um, it's not necessarily something that I'm interested in, but I do find it fascinating.
Mm-hmm. So if I wanted to, if I wanted to call in, for some reason, I'm hearing Venus, the love,
About hers, yeah.
but love in not the romantic sense only, but love for humanity, love for one another, love as a whole. So if I decide that I'm feeling that there's something inside me that wants to get more connected to that love energy. So, okay, so I'm going to use Venus as a compadre,
Ah,
as a guide that can help support me. How do I recognize um, how do I recognize how to call in the energy that I'm looking for specifically? Because let's say again with using Venus, I don't necessarily want romantic love, but I want
mhm,
love for all beings, all things, everything. So
absolutely.
I know that asking a question in a specific way or making a request or asking for support, it's really important how we word it because it can be misunderstood. So, can
Yeah.
you kind of talk about how to word things or how to request that energy to come to me in the way that I intend it to be, even though I may not vocalize it exactly
Mhm,
correctly?
mhm. Yeah. So, like I was saying earlier, like each culture has a different name for the same aspect of things, right? So Venus is the Roman version of the Greek Aphrodite. Okay, so that's who I would use. So it's the same energy because I was thinking about that earlier actually during this conversation. And the wording part is really interesting because I think people, when they learn about metaphysics and manifestation and things like that, we learn early on that the universe doesn't really um, recognize negatives, right? So if you say, I don't want to do a specific thing, then the universe is going to give you more opportunities to not want that specific thing, right? Um, it's like you have to, so if I you have to speak to the universe in positive. So it is very, very, very important the way that you word things. You have to be very specific because sometimes, and I have a history of this. When I was younger and I didn't know what I was doing, I did a love spell before I knew any better. And I stated out a bunch of things that I wanted. And I got all of those things, but I got a whole lot more than what I bargained for, right? Because those things tend to go sideways. Um, so just be very specific would be my direction for wording and asking. Tell them what you want. Don't ever talk about what you don't want. Okay. So if you were to say, okay, so say you don't want I don't know, say you have an issue with a sibling. Okay. You can't say, I don't want him to be like this anymore. You would have to say, I want him to be like this and state how you do want that person to behave and act, right? Because if you say you don't want, then like I said, it's just going to give you more opportunity to not want that thing. Um, it's like you can pray for, like, if you're in a bad situation and you want to get out of it and you pray for patience, you're going to get patience. That's not necessarily going to remove you from that situation, right? But when you start praying and asking for change, that's when things will change.
Mhm.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. So, I think change is a good thing because, a lot of people that, may be in difficult relationships, maybe in difficult jobs, or just want to change the way that they're living their lives, change. So, when you're talking about change, how would you call in? Well, how do you even know what god or goddess to call in? Do you narrow it down to, okay, this is what I'm looking at, I want change, in my life. I want change in my relationship. I want change in my job. So,
Yeah.
how do I determine what god or goddess that I would call in? And then, how would you ask the question? Or would you ask a question to create change? Or would you ask a question more or less to guide me through how to create the change?
So what I would do first off, finding the deity or the person that you want to work with, right? It definitely depends on how you grew up. It definitely depends on what cultures you're comfortable with, right? I grew up like reading about all the Greek myths, so I'm very comfortable with that. So if I wanted change, I would maybe, it depends on what kind of change as well, but perhaps like God Athena is the goddess of war and wisdom. Okay. So war would be change, and wisdom is always a good thing. Information, intellect. So I would probably approach her and just ask her to help me with whatever I have going on in my life. Now, since I am a practicing witch, and I have been my whole life, I like tools. I like crystals. I like herbs. I like candles. I like things. And each goddess and each tradition, each god and goddess have their own things that represent them, right? The things that they enjoy. So you can use those tools to maybe call in them and help make that connection stronger. The main thing, though, you don't have to use the tools. In my opinion, it just helps. The main thing is your intuition and the connection that you might feel. If you don't feel a connection when you're like, so first off, research, have all these books, right?
Mhm.
Research, like find the goddess that or god that like is specific to your issue at hand, right? And then feel if you have a connection. Do you feel any kind of spark there, any kind of connection? If you don't, then keep looking. But if you do, then find out what they like. Find out the herbs, the oils, the fragrances, the items, the curios that actually represent them, and then collect those, and then just make an offering, maybe on your altar. Light a candle for them, and then just ask for help. Ask them for their intercession, just like a Catholic would with saints in a Catholic church, right?
Mhm.
It's the same thing.
Yeah. So, what's the difference between gods and goddesses and angels?
To me, they're all the same, but that's like that. A lot of people would probably not agree with that, but that's just par for the course. Angels, God, goddesses, the universe. I feel like it's all energy. I feel like it all comes from the same place. I feel like it's our human mind that has to make that delineation. And that delineation sometimes allows us to be more successful in our workings. But if you just wanted to say, hey, universe, can you help me out here? It's still going to work.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah, I agree with that. I think that it is the energy that the universe is going to bring the guidance in whatever form
Absolutely.
is needed to assist us. But a lot of people do like to focus on specifics. It makes them feel better to I'm going to work with this particular god, or I'm going to work with this particular angel, and so going into a little bit more detail about the angels, because we have the archangels. What are the different types of angels that exist, basically?
Right. So I always find it interesting because people think that because in order to make ourselves feel comfortable, right, we always picture these things as humans or maybe an animal, right? But I'm not a real big believer in the Bible. I think that it's an interesting book. But if you go back there and you look through it, the descriptions of the angels crack me up. It makes me laugh. And that's the thing, like we need humor in this too, right? We can't be so serious, take ourselves so serious all the time. But in the Bible, every person that is presented with the appearance of an angel, right? It describes them as cowering and quaking in fear because these things are scary, okay? Like they're described as like a giant ball with hundreds of eyes, even on their wings, right? These things don't look like people, so biblically accurate angels are actually quite scary. Um, so I think it's interesting. But the angels, like I use the archangels. I ask for their help in every Reiki session that I give. There's Archangel Michael. He cuts ties and he cuts cords and he eliminates unnecessary energetic interactions, right? Raphael, he heals. Uriel is the guy that I use for grounding, okay? And then Gabriel gives us messages, you know? So they all have specific jobs and specific duties, and I actually use them quite a bit. I do not see them, however, as Christians would see them. I just see them as energies that are there. They're kind of like the pillars of the universe. You know what I mean? Like there's different things that hold everything together, and I feel like those are one of some of that. If that makes any sense.
It does. It does. So so are there other types of angels besides the archangels?
I don't know. I mean, if you for Christians believe there are, yeah. The archangels would be the most powerful, and then there's just the regular angels, and then there's the fallen angels, you know. But I don't necessarily subscribe to all of that, so it just depends on what culture and what religion you were raised in.
Yeah. So, okay, so let's get into entities then.
Mhm.
Okay, so what are entities to you and how are they generally understood in the mystical and spiritual traditions?
So, you know, mainstream, there's angels and there's demons, right? And those would be the entities. You see all these movies, and I am a fan of horror movies. I'm not going to lie. But you watch these movies about like possession, you know, like The Exorcist and all this stuff, and I just kind of have to laugh at the narrow scope that all of these movies have. Um, I do not. I don't know. I don't necessarily know. I'm 40. I'm almost 44 years old, and I'm still learning as I go. And I think that's very important as well. Keep a flexible mind, right? When you're presented with new information, you change your belief system. I think that's healthy. Um, as of right now, I believe that there are. I don't believe in evil. And I don't believe in, you know, I don't believe in like the good versus evil thing. I believe that there's energy, and I believe that it is filtered through humans to make it what we perceive as good and evil. Does that make sense?
Mhm.
Uh, it's like that old Shakespeare quote: "There is nothing good or bad, but thinking makes it so." Right?
Yeah.
What we perceive as just horrible and wrong can be something that's just commonplace and a daily occurrence in another culture. Right?
Mhm.
So it's really interesting that line, that morality line. Um, entities, I do believe that like I will go and I will clear people's houses, right? And I have felt some crazy things in some of these places, right? Um, I believe personally that it's leftover energy. I believe that a lot of what we think are entities um, is an energy that was left over from a traumatic experience in a certain location. I believe that people can carry these traumatic energies along with them, so that's what we like. People get haunted just like houses do, right? So I believe that a lot of that is that. Um, I don't necessarily know if I believe that there are non-human entities that try to come and terrorize us. I just don't think I do. I think most of that stuff is things that we create in our own mind.
Mhm.
Uh, but you know what? There's those odd occurrences that I'm totally willing to change my mind. So
Yeah.
it's one of those things like I'm not really constricted by rules, right? Like if I see something, I will change my point of view. So
So let's go back to the comment that you made about picking up energy in
yeah.
specific locations, because
Mhm.
I do agree with that as well. I think that you can pick up negative energies in a place, and if there's been a lot of trauma in a place, I think that energy stays in that location if it's not cleared out. Um,
Absolutely. Also, I believe the opposite, like the creativity.
yeah,
You know, like if we're walking to like a cafe or a coffee shop where like writers have always been sitting there and coming up with these things, you feel that energy as well. It
yeah.
collects in place.
Yeah.
So,
Well, and that's important to understand too, because when we go to different places, I can't talk, sorry. When we go
right.
to different places and different locations, you can feel the energy. Like
Mhm.
you said, when you go into a place that has a lot of creativity, creativity generally comes from a place that's within us that is the happy place,
Mhm.
that happy high energy where we're focusing it at a higher vibration, when we become creative. That's usually when we find the love that's inside of us, and that aspect of us that is that higher vibration. And
Mhm.
I feel like we emanate that, and
Me
that
too.
kind of helps to fill the space. But if
Mhm.
you go into a place that there's a lot of sadness, a lot of grief, a lot of maybe violence, has
Mhm.
happened, that energy is still the same to me, as it emanates from those individuals that are experiencing that as well. does
Absolutely.
does that make
And
sense?
yeah, it does. And honestly, like years after the fact, if that energy hasn't been cleared out of a space, the people can be completely absent from it, and that energy is still there.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? That accounts for a lot of haunted houses
Yeah.
and haunting and things like that. I think it's just energy that people don't really understand.
Hmm.
Um, Now, I have had some experiences where there were, I guess, what we would call entities still attached to the place, in the case of like a death or something like that. And honestly, none of us really know. I mean, we have our guides and our spirit guides and, our dreams and our prophecies and our divinations, but no one really knows what comes afterwards. You know what I mean? Like all we have is what we've been told, because nobody has really experienced that and come back. Um, some people say they have, and it just depends on whether you believe them or not, or
Hmm.
what they experience. And also, who's to say that their experience is going to be what you experience? It could be completely individualistic.
Yeah.
So I think it's
Well,
interesting.
yeah, but that's a good point though too, because if you listen to a lot of near death experiences, there's some similar things too, but there are also some things that are very different. And I
Very
think that
different.
it's very it depends on who that person is and their experiences and their journeys that take them on that path. So that creates that understanding that just because you experienced this, if you had a near death experience, this is what you experienced. It doesn't mean it's going to be the same for me. That my
Absolutely.
my journey may be a little bit different. But
And we don't want it the same, right? We want it to be different. That's
yeah,
what keeps it interesting.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. Keeps the mystery going, right? So, one of the things that that you're talking about, we're kind of going down a rabbit hole, but I'm kind of curious
All right.
about clearing energy, and
Yeah.
how you do clear energy in a house or in a space or in the land. How do you do that? What's your process?
So I use tools again. We'll use sage, Palo Santo. Um, I grow herbs. I have an extensive garden at home. We call it the Green Man Garden. Um, so I make smudge sticks or smoke cleanse sticks out of 8 different herbs to bring in good things after I clear out with sage. Beyond that, it's really just when I get to a property, I'll walk the perimeter of the property to kind of feel it out, and then I'll go through each space, whatever it is, if it's a barn, a house, whatever, and I'll go through each room and I'll just stop and I'll close my eyes and I'll just try to make that connection and see what I feel, or if I see anything different in each room, and then I will use the tools to clear out the energy. And as I'm doing that, I will ask them to move on, to go to wherever their next place to be should be, where, because they shouldn't be here. Personally, like, I think every witch should live in a haunted house. um, so whenever I clear our space at our house, I always ask them, I always say, hey, if you don't have any ill intent, then you can just hang out. But if you're going to cause problems, then you need to make your exit now. I have something that lives in my art studio at home. I affectionately refer to him as Walter. Sometimes I'll see him out of the corner of my eye, and I'll just have a conversation with him, because honestly, like, you just have to treat. I mean, in my opinion, the best way to do this is to just treat them like they're living human beings. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
People that are being terrorized by, things that they don't understand, things that they see out of the corner of their eye, if they're hearing voices or whatever, I always tell them, first thing to do is put your foot down. Like, you wouldn't allow a living human to treat you like that. So why are you letting a dead one treat you like that. Like, put your foot down. You're the one with the body. You're the one that's ultimately in control. You just have to, assert yourself. And a lot of times that's really hard for people to do. I don't know why I was always surprised that it was so hard when I look at, like, it's really hard for a lot of people to just assert themselves with other human beings, right? So when they're faced with something that they don't understand, of course it's going to be more difficult.
Mm-hmm.
But
So yeah. So, we're taught to, I mean, I say we're taught, I've been told numerous times that, if you have a spirit, an entity, whatever it is that you want to call this energy ball that is in my space that may be remaining from a human body that has left the earth, or no longer living, we're told to basically send that energy to the light. So is that something that we're supposed to do, or
So what, like, there's that whole thing again. People who refer to themselves as light workers tend to, and I don't want to disparage anybody because I appreciate everybody and everything that they do, but I think that we need a balance. I think that a lot of people, and I live my life like this as well. It's like, if there are rules that don't make sense, then why follow them? Right? I don't necessarily assign rules to any of this stuff. It's just what you have, what you feel in the moment, right? I mean, there's no police that are going to come around and being like, you didn't send them to the light, you're in trouble. You know what I mean? They want to hang out and they're not doing anything bad. I say let them hang out. I don't think that that's breaking any rules. I feel I'm a really big proponent of balance. There is no light without the dark, right? Like, me personally, I don't ever do any kind of dark magic or anything like that, but it has to exist in order for, light workers and things to be able to do their work. Sorry, my hat's uncomfortable.
um so uh, we're
Yeah.
this is not where I was planning to go with this conversation,
I like
but
apples,
I'm
so
enjoying it. So we're going to dig in a little bit deeper.
good.
So so when you're talking about Walter, is Walter what we call a ghost? Is Walter just an energy?
Right.
And and why is Walter still on Earth and not in a different dimension?
Right. I'm, who knows? I haven't really had the conversation with him. I know that he makes me feel okay. Like, he doesn't make me feel scared or bad. He, like, whenever he's around, I feel good. Um, I don't think there's ever been in, like, an accident or anything in our home, although it is an older home. But I don't think there's a history of that. He could be connected to something. One of the crazy things that I have in my art studio, I could have brought him home from a client. I'm not really too sure. I have a tendency to collect, like, antique bird cages and antique, just stuff like old mirrors and things like that. Mirrors are a real hotbed of, like, I mean, mirrors are usually haunted, right? Because it's like a portal to another world. So who knows? All I know is that I really enjoy his company, and when he's ready to go, he can go. Don't necessarily get caught up. A lot of stuff. I was just having a conversation the other day with my friend, and I realized why I do some of the things I do. When we first started doing this, I had so many people, like, in their readings, like, well, who are my spirit guides? What are their names? What did they do? Like, and they're so caught up in the information for their spirit guides and, like, all this stuff. And then after a while, I realized that they're missing the point.
Yeah.
So I don't necessarily get caught up in all of those details, because it doesn't matter, if your spirit guide was a Lemurian priestess named Alexandria. It doesn't matter, right? What really matters is, why is she here with you? What is she trying to help you do? And making that connection with her, right? I don't like getting caught up in the details. So I don't know. I've never really thought about whether he's a ghost, or I guess the word that comes to mind when I think about Walter is a spirit.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what
Yeah.
I've always used.
Yeah. And I guess, I really haven't thought about what is the definition of a ghost.
Right.
What is a ghost? Is it just a name that we put on this spiritual or this energy ball? What is it?
Yeah, and I know a lot of people who get really, they have a whole hierarchy like laid out for them, and if it works for them, then that's wonderful, you know. But like, I have a friend who teaches some courses, and she has like there's 5 different kinds of ghosts, you know, and I don't even remember the 5 because that's not the way that I see things, but it works for her, and that's wonderful.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But I don't feel the need to for the delineation of all of that. You know, I have friends, multiple friends, who are very successful mediums, and you know and channelers, and what they've been told is that there's this whole hierarchy, and they can sit there and explain to their clients the way the afterlife works. Like first you're here, and then you're there, and then this happens, and then this happens. But to me, that doesn't resonate, and I don't feel the need to know all that stuff, if that makes any sense.
Oh, it does. It does. And
I feel
we're
like
going
there's
to,
a bigger that we should be after.
yeah. Well, we're going to build on that comment
Mm-hmm.
towards the end of the conversation.
Okay.
Okay. So one of the things that, is also important is intuition.
Absolutely. That's what I
And
base.
so,
Yes.
what role does intuition play in our lives, and how can it help us in our personal growth?
Mhm. So intuition. Think about what intuition is first. You said that you wanted the definition of ghost earlier. I can give you the definition of intuition. Intuition is knowing something without having the natural means to do so. Okay, so it's the gut feeling. It's the just knowing. All the clairs, clairvoyance, clairaudience, clairsentience, and then there's the other ones like the touch and the smell that I can't ever clair something something. They're weird words. I can't ever remember them, but they're there. So all those are just like your psychic senses, which basically are your regular senses, but like amped up on a different level. Okay. And I feel like personally, I feel like everybody has an intuitive sense. Okay. Intuition is right there. Okay. So this is going to sound weird, but bear with me. Fear. Okay. Fear is important because that keeps us alive, right? Maybe not necessarily not so much on a regular basis nowadays as it did when we were like cavemen living in caves, right? You get scared, run,
Fight or
right?
flight.
And
Yeah.
fighter, right. And so I feel like intuition is the same. I feel like everybody has a sense of intuition. I feel like if you listen to that, that can help keep you alive. I feel like it's a built-in safeguard, right? However, I feel like in the past, like whether you believe in a prehistory or whatever, I believe that our psychic senses were much, much more finely developed. Okay. And over time, we started to lose it due to things like the Roman Catholic Church and the Dark Ages, the yeah, all of that, like different things. But they started to take away some of our psychic senses, and then people started raising their children, being like, "Oh no, that's not real. No, you don't see that. You just think you do. Stop." And I was one of those. Like somehow, I escaped it. I was born in 1980, and somehow, like the stars decided that all 3 of my big 3 astrological signs would be cardinal. Okay, so like I looked at those people when I was 6 years old, telling me that I was wrong and trying to shame me into silence. And I got quiet, but I was like, no, I'm right. You're wrong. And then I just sat still for 17 years.
Mm-hmm.
You know
Yeah.
what I mean? So I've always known that things are a little like there's a lot more to what we see and experience than what we actually see and experience, right? Like for instance, the visual spectrum. Okay, like there's the visual spectrum, like from infrared to whatever. Like it's very large, and we only see with the human eye a part of that. So who's to say that we're not using our intuition to pick up things on the other ends of the spectrum that other people can't see? It just depends on how tuned in we are. Some of us are just naturally more tuned in. Some of us have to develop it. And then some of us are just so closed off this lifetime that we don't know anything about what's really going on around us. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I do. I do know what you mean. So a lot of times, a common question that I have, and I'm sure that you do too, is how do I discern from my intuitiveness to my mind?
Right.
How can I tell what the difference is? Do you have any tips for that?
Practice. honestly. I was lucky enough to have like a natural sense. I did it. My husband pointed it out. Like I do it with one breath. When I meet a new person, I didn't even realize it, but after about 15 years into our marriage, he pointed out and he just said it matter of factly. He's like, well, you do it with your breath. I'm like, what are you talking about? Apparently, whenever I meet a new person, I'm like, hello, and I take a breath. And then after that breath, I have already made up my my mind on what this person is like energetically. And I didn't realize I did it until he pointed it out, which I think is very interesting because sometimes these mechanisms that we use are so ingrained that we don't even know. And a lot of times, since I have been doing this my pretty much my whole life, my challenge is to step back and look at the situation as someone who came to this in their 30s, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's my very different. I've done a lot of things in my life and had habits and everything through my life that I didn't even realize weren't normal until my mid 20s when my Reiki master pointed it out, right? So it's interesting because everybody comes at it differently. Everybody has their own level of openness. Um, and I guess my goal is just to help pull that out. The difference for me rests in my solar plexus and my third eye. Like if I feel it and know it, it's a weird like mixture of those two things. And whenever those things are there, it feels different than everything else. Like I can always tell whenever I'm making something up or when I'm actually feeling something. You know what I mean? And it's just a matter of practice. That's why I've been teaching an intuitive tarot class for 20 years, every other Thursday for 20 years. And that's what we focus on is just getting in touch with your intuition. The cards are just a tool. You
Mm-hmm.
know, you see in there and it triggers something else. And then you have this whole, and a lot of people are like, I feel like I'm just making this up. And I'm like, but you are. You know what I mean? Like you're grasping these things that are being given to you and creating a story is the challenge. And then saying it is even more challenging. A lot of people, like the biggest thing for your intuition is trusting yourself. Does that make sense to you?
Mm-hmm.
Like you have to say it. It has to come out of your mouth or you're never going to know whether you're right or not, right? And you know, if you're not right, maybe this isn't maybe that situation's not for you. My husband, the first fair he ever worked, he does something called Lenormand cards, which are amazing. It's the Parisian fortune telling cards from the 1700s. And he sat down at a fair, had a client sit in front of him. He threw the cards out. He was getting ready to do this whole thing. And she's like, I need to know what I need to do, you know, with my life because I'm going through this divorce. And my husband heard in his mind, you can eat breakfast for dinner. And he was like, what the hell is that? You know, right? Like, what does that mean? And they were like, say it. Like, they told him. They said, say it. And so he said it. And the lady's completely changed. She slammed her hand down in the middle of the cards and she goes, you're right. I can eat breakfast for dinner. He always hated that. And I'm good. I can do whatever I want. And she gets up and she walks off. And my like didn't even have to do any reading or anything. So that's my go-to for like just say what you hear because it might not make sense to you, but it's gonna make sense to someone else. Because more likely than not, if you're into this stuff, there is some level of connection.
Mm-hmm.
And the more that you let it through and trust, the more it's gonna come through.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And it's funny because it's when you were talking about that, man, my head is like, oh my gosh,
Yeah.
it's like everything just shot fire just went through me whenever you were talking about that. And you know, I mean, I have that happen all the time, and I'm doing a reading. It's like I don't know why they're showing me clowns, but
Mm,
this is what they're doing. And what do you think about? Oh,
ah,
well, I love clowns. Oh, really?
right?
Okay, well,
Okay.
here we
Oh,
go
yeah.
then.
Yeah. Yeah. It's
You know,
really
so
interesting.
there
Very
is that
cool.
point that I've learned that, you know, you do kind of have to trust whatever's coming to you and
Yeah.
having a conversation with somebody when something is coming up like that. You know, being able to get feedback. Okay, well, I'm just going to tell you what I'm seeing. How does that feel with you? Does that make sense to you? Well, yeah, it makes perfectly. Oh, okay. Well, now I can start trusting this.
Right.
That's
It gets easier as you go. It
yeah.
really does.
Yeah.
And also, I'm going to put it out there for people who are just starting with divination or readings or whatever. Sometimes you will get like that blank stare, you know, like they might not have any clue what you're talking about. And that's okay too, because generally it will come to them in like, it could be weeks, it could be months, it could be a year.
Yeah.
But I've had people who sat across from me and were just completely non-believing in
Yeah.
anything that I'm saying. They'll come back to me and they apologize for their attitude because blah 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 happened, just like I said it would.
Yeah.
And of course, by for the reading, and I'm like, okay, cool, you know,
Yeah.
glad it worked out for you. But
Mhm.
you have to have that also. Like, just know that it they might not even notice it, you know, when it happens, but it's most likely gonna happen.
Yeah.
So, but there's also that thing where you have to, where you can feel. I don't know. It's so hard to explain. You know what I mean? Like you just get that feeling that this is what I should say. You know what I
Mhm.
mean? Maybe sometimes you get other things and you're like, maybe I shouldn't say that, and that's important as well.
Mhm. Well, and so this kind of leads into the question of living your life intuitively, making your choices and decisions, and the people that, you're having conversations with, learning
Yeah.
what to say and what not to say. So what are your words of wisdom in living an intuitive life?
Yeah. So I I mentioned before I went to art school. I fought tooth and nail to go through art school for 6 years. Okay. Um, After art school, I tried to be a photographer, wedding photographer for God's sake, and it was just miserable, and I hated it. I think I shot 9 weddings before I quit, and then prayer beads, and everyone was like, "Oh my God, those are so pretty. Like, can you make me some?" And I was like, "Sure." So I started selling them on Etsy, and it just blew up. And now I have a metaphysical shop in South Lake, Texas, and I make a living doing readings and Reiki. Right? So who knew that that's the way that it should have been? But after college, I realized like I shouldn't have had to fight tooth and nail to get that degree if that's what I was supposed to be doing. Right? I love my degree. I have no regrets. I love art. It's all over. Like I have arthurgraye.com is like I travel the world and make these photographs, and it's my first passion. But I could have done it differently. And that's when I decided that I was always just going to listen to my gut from now on. I was just going to let things happen, and you can't force it. I'm a 500-hour yoga teacher, and in those yoga, those yoga learnings and teachings, there's something called dharma. And dharma is all about going with the flow. Like you don't want to like swim against the current. You want to swim with the current. Allow the universe to guide you and propel you forward, right? Nothing like you hear that saying, if it's worth having, it's worth fighting for. And I agree with that to an extent, but there's a point in there where you have to realize, is this what the universe wants? Should I be doing something else? I was trying to do the photography thing and it just nothing was happening and it was miserable and it was horrible. And I was on my yoga mat in Shavasana, the meditation at the end, and all of a sudden, I was told to mix my spiritual stuff with my artwork. And so I did. I created this piece called The Oracle, still one of my favorites. Um, and I got it, I applied, I put it in, it got in a gallery. First time I got in a gallery, and then it sold opening night because I was following my guidance, right? So when you follow your intuition and you follow the breadcrumbs that the universe is leaving for you, things in your life tend to calm down and get a lot easier.
Yeah.
I set the intention to where I just didn't want to deal with like real world stuff. Like I don't want to be on the phone with banks. I don't want to be on the phone with my school loans. I don't want to do this stuff. You know what I mean? And everything has just kind of molded itself. I've manifested this life for myself where I don't have to do those things that I absolutely despise. And I find that fascinating. And I wish that more people could access that intuition and manifestation for themselves.
Yeah. Yeah.
You
Well,
think?
it's very important. People understand living intuitively and manifesting, but it's also this point of I don't think they really do understand it. to the fullest extent, and being able to go with the flow. And again, it's one of those things that you can't really describe. It's one of those things that you just know, you feel it, you recognize that, oh, all of a sudden everything is falling into place.
And
Oh,
it's really hard to speak as well, because you
yeah.
can talk at somebody, all you want, and they
Mhm.
can be like, yeah, I understand, but do they really understand until it actually happens to
Yeah.
them?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, I can tell someone, we do that. My Reiki master gave us this thing called the living vision, right? And it's something we do once a year. And it's like writing out exactly what you want to happen in the coming year, and writing it as if you already have it,
Mhm.
just to manifest more. And then we put it in our wallet and we carry it around with us. Um, oh, I lost my train of thought. But oh, I lost. I did. I lost it. That's bad.
We're talking about, yeah, we were just talking about learning how to go with the flow, more or less,
Right.
and
Right.
recognizing, how to surrender. Basically, it's almost like,
Mhm.
stop fighting for it. When you have to push
Right.
and push, and there's conflict, and there's hesitation, or there's pushback, and it's like
Right.
things you having to fight for something. You need to really start thinking about it. Is it your mind that's creating the idea of the want or the have to, or
That's
is
what I.
it,
That's what my.
yeah,
Yeah.
or is it
And
that
another.
something that's just coming
Uh,
to us, that, that's meant to
Another
be?
good example of what I was talking about is like when people say they're climbing the corporate ladder.
Right.
You know what I mean? It's like they climb that ladder, and they're knocking other people off the ladder, doing all these things, whatever they have to do to get up there. But what's going to happen when you get
Mhm.
up there?
Yeah.
You're fighting for this thing. And when are you going to realize that if you're fighting that hard for it, then it's probably not what you're supposed to be doing?
Right.
You know?
Yeah. And it
Interesting.
yeah, and are you gonna be happy doing it if you're forcing
Exactly.
it? Yeah, yeah.
Exactly.
So, okay, so the other thing, you've mentioned a couple of times that you're a witch. And
Yeah,
there's a lot of misunderstanding or stereotype about what a
absolutely.
witch is, going back to the Salem witch burning trial, for example.
Anyway,
So give me a definition of what a witch is to you.
a witch to me is someone who is just more in touch with nature, and they can use the elements and the things that are unseen to their advantage.
Mhm.
They're just more in harmony with the natural world.
Yeah. So when we
That's,
talk, yeah, so when we talk about witchcraft, what is
mhm.
the definition of witchcraft?
Witchcraft would be like the workings that one of these people do, whether it's energy or, it's all energy, but whether they use tools or they just walk out in the forest and manifest things. Um, People like me tend to have more of a connection to nature. Animals tend to like them a little bit more. They're just not as preoccupied with the things of the world. You mentioned some of the stereotypes, and I find them funny. And you actually mentioned Salem as well. During the pandemic, I decided that I was ready to teach my witchcraft course, and I wanted to make sure that I was confident enough to do it. So I signed up. I don't know if you're familiar with a lady named Lori Cabot, but she is the witch of Salem. I think she might be in her 90s now, but during the pandemic she taught her classes online for the first time ever. So I took a bunch of those classes, and it was right in line with everything that I had been doing. I think I learned maybe two new things, which was awesome and well worth the money. But it just gave me the confidence to step out and start teaching my own thing. um, Nature has always been a very important thing for me. If I had to pick which witchcraft path of witchcraft, it would be green witchcraft, but I don't necessarily subscribe to any specific path. So I guess you would say that I'm eclectic, which I don't know, it's a term. So
Well, and again, I want people just to kind of understand a little bit more about that witchcraft,
yeah,
because so many of us have been conditioned to believe that it's all the darkness.
darkness. So there is no Satan in the craft, as far as I'm. That movie Practical Magic is very, very accurate whenever it says like the whenever it's with its world building, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
There is no devil in the craft. The evil is only what we make.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I there are some, okay, so like for instance, I'm wearing black, right? I wear all black usually, not only because it's slimming and I like it, but because because it literally is the power of all colors. The whole rainbow is in black, and that's just a scientific fact, right? You shine white light through a prism and it separates into all of its constituents, right? So all light, when it comes together, it creates black. So this has the protection of white light, pink light, purple light, the whole spectrum all in it, and that's why witches normally wear black. um, if the real deal, they'll know that. If they're not and they're just doing it for looks, then that's a whole different thing. The other thing that I would like to clear up that I think is very, very common is the pinnacle. Okay, so let me see here. Take it off. The pinnacle, or the pentagram, is a star with a circle around it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Whoop, here we go.
Yeah.
So the thing with that, it's a protection piece. The four points represent the elements. The top point represents divinity, whatever God it is that you believe in, or the universe. And then the space in the middle is where we are in reference to all of those things. And I think that's beautiful. I've always been drawn to it. I've never felt like it was evil, but I know that a lot of people do have that connotation with it. So just like to clear that up.
Yeah.
The
Well, I'm glad
viewer.
you did, because if you watch movies, then the pentagram is
Absolutely.
always associated with the
Yeah.
darkness and the evil.
And also,
Yeah.
like I'm guilty of it as well, because I find I like those movies like we talked about earlier. I enjoy horror movies. I enjoy good fiction, but half the time I'm just like, oh my god, this is so wrong.
Yeah.
Like it's a bad example.
Yeah. Well, I want to wrap this up in with the last question of talking about community. And we're
Yeah.
all going through these huge shifts and changes energetically. Our consciousness is changing, and we're finding, like I channel the Akashic records. You're a witch. You have people that are mystics. You have people that are connected to oh my gosh, they talk to dead people. I just forgot the
Yeah.
word.
Mediums.
Thank you. One of those M words. Sorry about that. But we have all these people, people that do tarot cards, or, we have all these different avenues to become
Yeah.
connected to spirit. And what I'm finding is that as we're all shifting and growing, and people that may not have ever really been familiar with what we do, people are finding that they're becoming more curious. They're letting go of that heavy 3D world, and they're finding that there's something else that's calling them that they're not familiar with. And then there's also a lot of us that are a little bit further down their path that are just looking for, oh my gosh, I just had this crazy experience. I need somebody to talk to. So tell me a little bit about how you feel about community and what we're going through.
First, I think that you said that they might not be familiar with. I think they are familiar with it on some level.
Yeah.
I think the people who are searching have had experience with it, whether it's this life, past lives, who knows, right? But I feel like it calls to them because it's like an echo of something that they used to know, right? I find it very interesting that over the last 10 years, when we first started doing this 20 years ago, in like 2009, we would go to Half Price Books and we would ask them to see all their tarot stuff, like their cards. They'd come out with like boxes and boxes of just cards that they had in the back because they didn't put them on the shelf, right? We would just buy all of it, okay? And over the last 20 years, we'll keep going back to Half Price Books. There's very little selection. People were giving it all up, but now I think that astrology, since we're moving into the age of Aquarius, or we've moved into the age of Aquarius, especially now with Pluto leaving Capricorn or whatever, people are accepting this more, and they're holding on to their books. They're holding on to their tarot because it's becoming more mainstream. my husband likes those singing competition shows, whatever. And like I was walking through the room one night, and I think it was one of the Spice Girls was on there talking about a dream that she had had that came true. And I'm just like, oh my God, this wouldn't have happened, when I was in high school, right? Like stuff is just becoming more acceptable. Like she was able to say that about her dream coming true and not be afraid of like what is it? Just being afraid of getting a negative response.
Right.
Uh, Community is really important to me. I think that people need a place to go in order to work out these things for themselves. Not only like work out the information, but also work on their abilities and their talents and letting these things happen. A lot of people, because of their upbringing, because their parents said, no, that's not real, they're just like, oh my God, I can't believe this is happening, blah, blah, blah. And they shove it down, right? And I think that's unhealthy. Just like when we shove down our emotions, it can result in physical illness, right? When we deny our abilities and we repress ourselves, that can also cause a lot of issues, not only emotionally and mentally, but also physically. So here at the Green Man Studios, I go out of my way to try to make everybody, pagans, Buddhists, I don't know, Hindus, Christians, I don't care. They're all welcome here. This is a safe space where you can come to me and you can talk to me about things that you're going through, and I can try to offer guidance. And I think that's really important. We have the store. I've started the Green Man Holistic Fair. We have it 3 times a year. Right now, it's out at Sneaky Pete's. Our next one is in January. That's where I met Monica, and so I take people out of the country on trips, and just try to create. We just got back from Paris. We were in Paris over Halloween, in the catacombs, and I had 16 people, and we all came out of there being a pretty tight knit group, and that's my ultimate goal, is to just show people that they're not crazy and that some of this stuff isn't as weird as they think it is, and that it can open up a whole new world for them.
Yeah. Yeah. So I do want to encourage people to communicate, and to find a tribe. And, and you may have to go through, a couple of different groups to find who you really resonate with. And as we grow and shift and change, you may have to change groups, but community is important. And it's important for in any form of life, basically just to have a sounding board, just to have somebody to be able to say, yes, I understand the experience that you had. Okay, you're moving on. You're growing. You're having these experiences, and this is what's happening. So
I have so many people coming being like, well, I have this thing happen, but it's kind of crazy, and they're real hesitant, and I'm like, nothing you can tell me is going to
right.
is going, like, it's fine, just say it.
Yeah. Well, Arthur, thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and your wisdom with me and with us. So how before we leave, how can people get a hold of you and find out more about what you do and provide?
So the Green Man Studios is, like I said, is a shop in Southlake. That's where I'm at right now. You can just go to our website at www.thegreenmanstudios.com, or you can email me at arthurgraye@thegreenmanstudios.com. Everything's there on the front page of the website. You can sign up for our newsletter. You can see our schedule, everything. I try to have at least 2 classes and a reader in here every Saturday. So we have a lot of different things going on. And yeah, please come see us if you're in the area.
Okay, great. And by the way, that's Southlake, Texas, right?
Southlake, Texas. Yeah.
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 All right. Well, Arthur, again, thank you for sharing all your wisdom. And for all of you guys, we'll see you next time. Thanks.